Peter Cowley. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure. Now, we're timing this pretty well, I think, in that your latest book literally just came out yesterday, now available in all good bookstores and online. And of course, we'll dive into your entire story throughout that, which and I got a copy yesterday, read half of it in one sitting, and it really is one of the most impactful and powerful books and stories that I've honestly ever read. And so we're obviously going to spend some time talking through that. But before we do, Peter, you're very well known in entrepreneurial circles and particularly in the Cambridge area. But for those for whom you're less well known, let's sort of go back to the beginning and sort of share some of your early entrepreneurial story. So, where did you grow up? Were you in an entrepreneurial family? Were your parents in business? Tell me a bit about your early journey.
Yeah. So actually, I'm at a friend's house here, which is in my hometown, as it turns out. Though I live in Cambridge, right. I'm actually just outside Hull at the moment because I'm seeing cousins later on today. So I grew up in Hull, middle class background. Parents, my father was a dental surgeon, so he ran a small business. He was there with his two partners. So they had staff, they had outgoings, they had some marketing, they had finance, they had a single check came in every month because that's how the NHS works for dentists. Right. But they had suppliers and everything else. So he was running a small business, it's a service business, and there wasn't much risk in it, but it was still a small business. So I had a good education, ended up at Cambridge University. But before I went to Cambridge, I actually decided to go and live, because I had a gap year, or most of a gap year, go and live in Australia. And I applied to a few jobs, and I got a job with somebody that was complete unknown in those days called Dick Smith. Dick Smith is now the Richard Branson of Australia, in that he's an entrepreneur, very successful entrepreneur, and explorer as well. And I went to see him again last year after 47 years, and we spent 3 hours just chattering away.
Wow.
And there's no doubt his entrepreneurial drive and zest and craziness rubbed off on me to some extent. So I have that. My father's a small business person. I've got the 6 months with Dick Smith. And then at university, I did what, this was 1975. I did what, entrepreneurs do. They try to be entrepreneurial. So I bought a traveling discotheque with a friend.
As you do.
As one does. Yeah. A traveling discotheque in those days, being a DJ was just putting vinyl onto turntables. It wasn't to do with manufacturing or creating music. And we ran that for a year, and then we sold it again before we started our final year. So again, I'd done something entrepreneurial. Again, very low risk service business, but still needed to buy content, to play content, to have difficult customers and easy customers, to collect money and have bad debt and all the various things, albeit for overall a tiny amount of money. So that's really what drove me, I think, to be entrepreneurial as soon as I could be.
Interesting. Did you actually sort of consciously think of yourself as an entrepreneur? Did you say, I am going to be, with all this background and history and experience and people I've spoken to, this is the journey I'm going on? Or was it more just kind of organic and you followed your sort of next thought?
It was a bit of both, actually, because after university, I went on the milk round, as it's called, and got myself a job. I had plenty of job offers. Cambridge University Computer Science in those days was a very attractive thing, and the computer industry was growing very rapidly. And I joined one of them, and 2.5 years later, I decided, my brother died of leukemia at the age of 21. I decided for a change, I moved out to Bavaria, which in 1980 was quite difficult. No internet, no method of researching in the same way as we have now. And I worked for a small company of about a dozen people that was actually going bust and was suffering from what I now know is called creeping excellence, where it was never quite good enough to ship. And if it's not good enough to ship, even if you've got a good product, you can't invoice. If you can't invoice, you can't get paid. So it was just short of money the whole time. So in the end, he sold himself to Heckler and Koch, who make machine guns and other things. And two of us decided we didn't want to work there. So that was my first entrepreneurial endeavor. My first proper startup was 1981 in Bavaria. And back to your question, this was probably on the grounding that I wanted to be entrepreneurial. I wanted control of my own life. I wanted to make a difference. I know, obviously not in an ESG type way in those days, but make a difference in terms of more control of my working life.
Were you an equity shareholder in that business in Bavaria?
I wasn't, though I did have she had a commission which was percentage of sales, which was interesting to have for a startup. The reason I wasn't is because when the co-founder, I took on a co-founder who I didn't have equity, had left the previous business. He had a very difficult relationship when he left. Long, complicated story. It's not talked about in the book because it's a bit private. And he didn't want external shareholders. First point. Second point, I was not committed to stay in Germany for that long.
Right.
So although my eldest, Matt, hadn't been born, he knew I'd be going. And the last you want to do is have a founder disappearing off to a different country. And, you know, although Munich and London aren't very far away nowadays with air flights, in those days, the world was a much more spread out, inverted commas, place. No internet, comms, all the rest of it. So no, I didn't have any equity.
Feels like I'm already very early on in your entrepreneurial journey. I'm understanding an appetite for risk, because it sounds like a big move to a different country. I presume you didn't speak fluent German.
No, I had O level in German, which means I spoke very little German. What I did have, though, was a girlfriend at the time that then became my wife in time, who had spent her gap year, because she also was at Cambridge, living in Vienna. So she did speak German. So that certainly helps. And also, all the senior people spoke English. All the junior, unlike nowadays, if you go to Munich, anybody under the age of 50 will speak English, probably very well.
Yeah.
Those days, anybody under the age of 50, unless they're in senior management positions, didn't speak any English. So my German suddenly clicked in. And so now, and even, you know, I used to dream in German then, but I can still, if you were to German here, or you could speak German, we could swap into German. I could swap in. It's a bit, my vocabulary's not that great nowadays, but it's quite fluent, or fluent in terms of
conversation.
Conversation. I do think in German once I get into German. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Sounds like a very interesting sort of early stage experience for you. Just pause for a second, and you used a phrase which I've heard before, but it'd be worthwhile for the audience benefit, just sort of exploring a little bit further. Creeping excellence. So is this, you said couldn't ship the products or couldn't invoice. I mean, we're continually trying to make the product better before shipping. Was that what that means?
Yeah. So, and I've met this several times since in other entrepreneurs I've backed, and also to some extent in myself. In the end, one wants to ship the perfect product, doesn't one? I mean, Apple clearly almost certainly do, subject to operating system updates on a regular basis as they find bugs. But in terms of the hardware, it's basically a perfect product. So we don't want to ship a poor product. And A, because we get a bad reputation, B, because there'll be some sort of returns, either returns during the warranty period or later. But at the same time, you do need to ship, because if you don't ship a product, this is a hardware business.
Sure,
It's slightly different software business, because the cycle of change in a software business is much quicker. You can release an update the same day. Whereas a hardware, it might take 3 months to release an update. And so there's a compromise. And like many things in life, there's a compromise between what you ship, being perfect or not, being perfect enough, being good enough, not perfect enough, good enough. And if you don't ship, you can't invoice. If you don't invoice, you don't get any money in. And therefore, where does the cash come from? And you have this habit of being a little bit perfectionist. But it doesn't mean that what went out was brilliant, really good. But if you don't ship, as I keep saying, you don't bring the cash flow, just collapses if you're not shipping.
Yeah, and a great lesson there earlier on. I'm familiar with that. I'm probably guilty of it myself, and just continue. It's not quite right. Let's just keep going and make it a bit better and a bit better. And if you're early stage in a business and there's no other money coming in, that can be a serious problem. So so that business ultimately didn't succeed, or what happened?
So that business we were talking about, the Creeping Excellence, sold itself to Heckler and Koch.
Right, that was
that. It became a division of which in time was owned by the Brits, by British Aerospace, etc., or BA as it's called now, BA Systems. So, but then the other business, Georg, I formed. So with day one, we've got Georg, we've got his girlfriend is doing the admin, his brother's doing the production. I'm a non-family member, and we grew that to over the next 4 years to probably about 25 people. And then Matt was born, my son, who's now 40. And then we came back to the UK. But I still wanted to be entrepreneurial, so I set up CamData, which I still have. It was 40 years old about 3 or 4 months ago. It was formed in late '83. It's had a very up and down journey. You might not have got to that point in the book. It's also in my other book, which is probably all relevant to your audience, which talks about angel investing, and the journey is the end of the first chapter there. So that's had, and I've learned so much from the ups and downs and going bust and resurrecting and everything of that. But 40 years is a long time.
40 years is a hell of a long time to be in business. And I have read and I've understood something about Cam Data. And I mean, tell us more about that the story of that business, because it's interesting because you had to sell it, then buy it back. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, the short version is that I grew it too rapidly. I made a complete mess, and this is actually a letter to my 29-year-old self, both on my own website and on Front Capital, which is a VC's website.
Right.
And one of the things I did was we made a complete mess in training, which we shouldn't have had to train, but we did. A bookkeeper, and she was putting incoming goods into stock rather than going out again. So the stock was rising, and so the gross margin was wrong. The balance sheet and the profit and loss account didn't agree. Obviously, they did agree on accounting level, but they didn't agree in principle. So we thought we were making profits, and we weren't, and we were increasing our borrowing to replace that. So we ended up this big cash hole, which we filled. There was no problem. And then we bumped into the 1990-1991 recession, which I can't tell how old you were there, but you might still have been at university or something.
I remember.
Or perhaps before that, maybe at school or something.
No, I remember it well. Put it that way.
Yeah. And that was super tough because we were selling capital equipment to people, and we were part of a chain of big capital projects, and they were all switched off in 1989, and this filtered through to us. And so eventually, too much debt, not enough business, shrank, kept shedding staff, but we had an underlying cost, and the interest rates were about 18% on the debt we had, etc. So we went bust. And then so I resurrected it very cautiously. In those days, there was no such thing as a pre-pack administration or anything. Right. You had to be very protective of the creditors. And I did it with a friend who I just saw yesterday, actually, for lunch, who lives in South Wales. And then I set it up again. And then I sold that business when I was going through a bad patch, particularly in terms of my alcoholism, which we'll cover later, to the same friend, as it turns out. And then he was going bust, so I bought it back from him. Wow. And then about 3 years later, I bought his business again. He didn't quite go bust, went into a CVA, Creditors Voluntary Arrangement. So I bought that back again. And I made about a 35x on that. I paid 27K and made about $750,000 of gross margin on that business, which I'm still running effectively.
Right. What a story.
Well, 40 years is a long time.
A lot of things certainly have happened. And as you say, we will talk about it in momentarily, about your personal life and what was going on then. But that Cam Data is still in business. Let me just go back on one particular point, which again I do find quite interesting. In my day job, we are a lot about numbers and facts and figures and so on. But what I found is a lot of entrepreneurs are driven by ambition, and as you sort of referred to earlier on, want to change the world, want to sort of transform the industry that they've been working in or the sector. And often, unless they've had a background in accountancy or some sort of numerical discipline, very few of them are real experts on things like don't know how to read a balance sheet, profit and loss, cash flows and forecasts and that sort of thing. I mean, what's your reflections on that? Clearly, it caused some challenges, a lot of challenges at this initial business or the Cam Data business. Any thoughts on that for business owners and really sort of upping their skills or again, hiring the right people and making sure the right people are doing?
Yeah. So first of all, because obviously most of I've set up a dozen or been founder or co-founder of a dozen businesses. I invested in 76. So I've been on best part of 90 journeys, and I've been very close to some of them. I've been on 40 boards. So my general, what I ask, which is possibly a waste of their time, I ask at least one of the founders to do the books to start with. Okay. So that way they get to understand the transactions. Now, obviously, early stage business, it's a bit of a waste of time when they should be doing other things like recruiting and so on, but they are getting a grounding if they haven't already got it. So they can understand what cash flow is, they can understand what a debtor is and what a creditor is and what that matters. They can understand the process of bookkeeping. I don't want them to do it for very long, but I want them to understand. So perhaps the first 6, 9, 12 months, And it depends on how much capital they've raised, of course. But if you go back 10 years, they'd raised $250,000 or $1/3 and that couldn't possibly justify spending on a bookkeeper or even a bookkeeping service in the very short term. Not much happening anyway. Yeah. Big chunk of cash comes into the balance sheet, goes out again with salaries. That's usually, unless it's it's a hardware product, they might have to start buying some services and then hand over probably to an external day a week bookkeeper to start with. And at some point, of course, they need the higher level financial, because that's what they have to develop. They've got to understand their own business. They need to understand balance sheets, their customers, their suppliers. So initially, they'll do it themselves, and then they'll outsource that. And this is a difficult one. How much time a external CFO or FC, maybe financial controller, needs to do. And I'm just on one board left nowadays because of my cancer. And I'm just talking to the founder actually on the way here when I was driving up from the Midlands earlier on. And getting that right, getting the cost and what they're going to do right is difficult. As you grow, of course, the bookkeeping growth actually is fairly obvious because that's just about related to number of transactions. All these businesses are VAT registered, so you need quarterly VAT returns, etc. The year end is usually done by somebody else. So that it comes at some point to be an internal role, the bookkeeping, but it's the higher level. It's really difficult to know what the timing is of a higher level. It's quite a long way down the journey generally before it's a full-time CFO role or FD role, because it's also expensive. I mean, even, it'll be 100K or something like that, or with on-cost maybe 120K. And that's a lot of money. You've got to raise a lot or be generating profit before you can justify that.
And so have you found that there's a journey that founders, if you're talking about a startup business initially and just doing everything themselves, and then you hire somebody to help you, just say on a part-time basis, but the needs and demands of sort of external third-party professional services, they will evolve and change. And the person that you were working with when you first started isn't necessarily the person to take you to the next level and a level above. So you've got to constantly be prepared to part company or to change relationships as you grow the business.
Hire slowly, fire fast. You must have heard that. And also, I mean, the CEOs generally, one of the things I always say to if I'm on joining a board of a company is don't necessarily anticipate to be the CEO at the point of exit, because unless you've grown faster than the business is growing, this is personally growing, of course, not by financial KPI. You're growing faster, then you will at some point be replaced, and you've got to accept that. So people get into the, you motivate. It sounds a bit of a threat, but it's not really a threat. But it does happen. You're motivating them to grow, and this means growing from mentors, paid coaching, going on courses. They've got to be, and then at some point, particularly if the company, not on exit so much, but at some point they may step aside and say, we'll have another, when we talk about one of my successful stories, you'll see how the CEO was replaced themselves soon after a transaction, actually.
Yes, that's very interesting because, of course, it's a personal thing. If the CEO is a founder and has actually, used their own savings or whatever, has raised capital themselves, to imagine themselves not being there at a future date can be a challenge. But I think your early stage mentoring and explaining this to them is a perfectly rational and reasonable thing. There's a different mentality to take somebody from 0 to 1 and then from 1 to 10 and 10 to 1,000 or whatever. So better to be well prepared for that. Now, you just mentioned there this idea of building towards an exit. From picking up from reading the book, when you started CamData, if I remember correctly, there was a very clear objective to do exactly that, to grow it, to sell, to exit. And I think, if I remember correctly, you were going to plan to retire at age 40.
As 35. I don't think it's in the book, but it was 35 to start with, and it soon became 40.
Okay.
Financial independence by 40,
Yeah. So what are your thoughts? And again, I've spoken to many founders and business owners and exited owners through this podcast and other parts of my day-to-day job. And the feedback I get is mixed and varied. So the question is, do you build a business for an exit from day one, or do you just try to grow a successful business and see what happens? What's the route?
That depends, obviously, what you want, but also depends on whether you take external finance. Because you've got to remember, if you're going to take external equity finance here, not debt, those financiers want to get out. They want to get out with a good multiple before too long. It's all very well having a 10x, but if it takes you 100 years to get there, that's not a very good return per year. Whereas if you get out in 5 years, then it's 20% or 30%, whatever the number is, probably a bit more than that. So if you take on external financing until equity holders, you will have to during the due diligence process, we'll check whether we believe you've got the drive and the passion to do that, and the ability, of course. But we'll do our best to work that out. But B, you'll have to accept you'll be on a journey that's probably scaling faster than you necessarily felt at times you're comfortable with. And just to point a very important point here, the companies that fail, most companies that fail of external capital is because they've disillusioned the investors and they can't find any new ones. So they've grown and they've been pushed into growing. They're not making profit. So if it stumbles and there's no new investment, the business really has got the only ways out are either to fail, to shrink, to break even, or to do a fire sale. So external investors do push, and I'm not talking about on the stock market here, I'm talking about
the VC
early stage angel investors will push for strong growth. So those people they won't have even got the equity if they show that they're not wanting for rapid scaling, and they, for instance, want a lifestyle business. And there's not, and there can be very big lifestyle businesses. I mean, I've been involved in Cambridge with one in principle lifestyle business for a long time. It's 110 years old, and it's still, until recently, it was run by the fourth generation founder with 5,000 people, but it was still basically it wasn't rapidly scaling business. So absolutely nothing wrong with building a business gradually by without external equity. But if you take external equity, you are on a different path.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to be clear about that. And I've certainly spoken to people over the years that were kind of not really one thing or another. They hadn't really had the conscious thought about it. They said, I've just got a business. It's doing quite well. We are growing quite well, but there is a different role, a different path, and different outcomes. You have to be prepared for one versus the other. Let's talk a little bit about the kind of taking investment from third parties. There's plenty of businesses I know doing very well, as they call it nowadays, bootstrapping, or just getting the income into the business to fund the next level of growth. And then there's those that go to outside third party investors, of which there are multiples, many different types of. And again, pros and cons of each. So talk us through that a bit. If somebody has gone to an external investor, they are deciding on a different route, as you say, and that external investor or their representative or somebody is going to sit on their board, is going to put a bit of a fire up their backside, is going to encourage them to move on, because this is all about money. This is about the investor getting a return, often either for themselves or for their investors and their clients. What are your thoughts on that, on having that sort of, that corporate discipline, the structure? And a lot of business owners perhaps resent that because they enjoy the independence of running their own show. What are your thoughts on the options?
Let's just distinguish two parts to that. So the area that the pond or whatever I swam in always is the very early stage,
right,
where there's no proof of product market fit. There's no KPIs that show that any EBITDA or anything like that. So you've got basically a pitch deck and 2 or possibly 3 founders. And at that stage, we're investing in those people. And I often say I invest in people with a plan rather than a plan with people. Right. Whereas a later stage, you probably are investing in private equity, invests in plans with people primarily, because they can swap the people out. You can't swap the people out at the beginning. Not in the first year or two, you cannot swap out the entrepreneur.
Right.
So the relationship is different, and the due diligence process is different. The other part of what you're saying, the governance and somebody sitting on the board, is also quite different, because if I come in as investor director at a later stage, I'm primarily protecting the investors behind me. And if it's a VC or VCT, you're protecting those funders. But if it's an angel group, you're investor director for the group. And but at the early stage, I found it's generally me being the mentor, or to some extent a coach for the business. I'm bringing in my own entrepreneurial experience, of which you heard I've got quite a lot, helping them grow. And this is described, you probably want to have got to that point in the book, a couple who'd just come out of university where the board meeting, doesn't say this, but the board meetings were 6 hours long, when they should have been an hour and a half, because most of it was preparing them and teaching them for the next, to the next board meeting almost. But they were super good learners, listeners and learners.
Right. Excellent. Thanks for clarifying that. So let's talk a little bit more about angel investing. And again, I know, a number of people that through this podcast and various others, what's quite interesting is founders, owners, successfully exited entrepreneurs. They find themselves in a situation where obviously they've got liquid capital and they can invest in property or the stock market or anything else, but they've got this kind of entrepreneurial itch that they want to continue to scratch. And they may not wish to start another business, but they like this sort of combination. So this is where angel investing comes in. They don't just exit entrepreneurs, but it's a form for anyone who is not crystal clear about it. It's a form of early stage investing in startup businesses, right? Very high risk, but potentially high rewards as well. You said 76 angel investments you've made so far?
Well, no, I've stopped. The combination, I stopped first round investing at 65 because it takes 10 or 12 years to get a good exit out of B2B, deepish tech business. And then, of course, I stopped all investing once the cancer was discovered.
But historically, that's sort of the volume of investments that you've made.
I did about 5 a year for 15 years or 6 a year for 14 years or something. Yeah.
Your sort of statistics are published on your website, aren't they? Can you share them? You sort of the successes, and the obviously the data around those that haven't been so successful.
So 2 things here. It's a numbers game and it's a power law game.
Right.
So I think we know that. I think that's generally known.
Yeah.
Numbers game, I've done a lot of analysis about this. Somebody who invests in 3 or 4 as an early stage investor, angel investor, has got a very good chance of losing all their money. Somebody gets up to 20 or so has got a pretty good chance of at least getting their money back. Right. Now, obviously, it depends because of the power law that you might have bumped into a unicorn or whatever. Maybe bumped into something. 76 is too many. I think about 40 to 50 is about the maximum you should get to, because otherwise the paperwork, most companies have a transaction every year of some form. They're changing the option table structure. They're raising a round. They're removing preemptive rights or something. So that with 50, you've basically got a transaction to cope with every week. And that's starting. And your spreadsheet gets very big and very wide. So I've done, as I say, 76. I haven't done any new ones for about 3-4 years. 4 years now. So they're starting to come home to roost, both in terms of failure and success. And they're all there on the website. I've been very open about it, including some comments about why they've failed. That usually comes back to product market fit, as we started to say, not being reached. And I have had 21 failures and I've had 20 successes. Now, in itself, that's unusual because people usually talk about 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, so 1 success for every 3 failures. So I've been lucky there. I've obviously chosen carefully. I've assisted where I can, and I've had some luck. But of course, that isn't the number that matters. What matters is money in versus money out. Because I could have lost £1 million on the 21 and brought in 100K on the 20. Right. But it isn't that. It's the other way around. I've actually brought in, I won't give the exact figures, but in ratios, I've all the money I've put in, I've got about 2.5 times out already, and I've got 35 left.
Right.
So this magic point of break even for angels, which is you've got back out all you've put in, and you might still have a portfolio, of course, at this point, is usually about 10 or 11 years, and I did it in 11 years. So you have to be really super patient in this game. Now, of course, you hear the stories in the press about, what was that thing that was sold to Twitter? I can't remember what it's called now. That 3 years later, it was $140 million exit after 3 years. Came out of Entrepreneur First. Of course you get these stories. What you don't get, there's so many stories of, are all the masses of failures.
which obviously are the vast majority versus those short-term success stories are such outliers, but they make for good news and good publicities. And everyone can get quite excited about those, assuming they're going to get the same, but definitely
but I've actually gone out of my way to explain the failures, because we learn more from a failure, don't we? We learn more from a failed relationship, say, than the successful one. So the entrepreneurs learn much more about why people have failed than why they succeeded. And of course, there's much more data about failures.
Sure.
We just don't talk about them enough.
Yeah, exactly right. So let me just try to take this from both sides, I suppose. So if someone's listening to this and they are either an early stage founder or they've got a great idea, they're just about to think about leaving their job and they need to go and perhaps raise some money from people like you or other sort of angel groups, what are the things that they need to think about in terms of pitching, presenting, capital raising? What are the key issues they should focus on?
First of all, the best way to approach somebody like me or an angel group is a warm introduction.
Right.
So go in through somebody who's somehow connected. So basically network. Choose who you want to network with, who you'd like to get the money from, which groups, and do that rather than just cold pitching. It'll make a huge difference. It's been a warm introduction. One year, the Cambridge Angels checked, and I think of all they did 18 new investments. Cambridge Angels is a high net worth group in Cambridge where I've learned huge amount from, and I was chair for a while. I think they had one cold out of the 18. So having a warm introduction is critically important. Obviously, at that point, you need to get together a plan. If you go back 10 years, it would be a 70-page business plan. Now it's a 14, 15, 16-page PowerPoint slide deck.
Yeah.
Then you need to get to the point where you can get in front of somebody. And again, the elevator pitch, meeting somebody at a networking event, all the usual sort of things. So when we look at this, and I specifically am particularly keen, and this is how I've done it, and maybe this is why it's led to more success than maybe some other people, is I investigate the team first. It's in my book, The Investor. The team should be the second slide, because the idea doesn't really matter in the end. They have to have an idea. They have to have a reason to raise money. They have to have a dream and a vision of going somewhere. But it's the people that matter. It's their ability to execute, both on raising capital, building a team, building a business, and in time, exiting. And so it's the people, it's their background. And these people all they have really is their own life experience, unless they're a second-time entrepreneur or third time, then it's very, very different. Somebody who's has already had a good positive exit will raise capital if they want to very much more easily. So and then you examine the people, and the most important things there are that they listen. So they listen, so you can see they need a level of drive, persistence, vision that other people might disagree with, but they've got to listen. They've got to listen to the market. They've got to listen to, all kinds of customers, maybe their own staff, etc. Maybe even the investors at some point. That's the first part. And then they've got to be truthful. They've got to be truthful to themselves. They mustn't, if they start lying, particularly to themselves, then the information flow back to staff wouldn't work very well, but specifically investors, if they're going out to more investment and they've started to tell untruths. And of course, we can't do much about it once we've invested, but pre-investment we can. And we do that by investigating their past, taking references. And similarly, they should take references on us as well if they can do, but taking references and just spending time with them, just understanding their characters. That for me are the two most important things.
So for those people who are founders or they plan to be, spend more time on just sort of selling yourself. What is your background? What's your story? Because that's all that the investor has really got. They've got an idea, pitch deck, and you as an individual. So, promote that, tell a story, do it as long as it's authentic and
that means the more charismatic ones who are better on stage are more likely to raise finance. Unfortunately, they're not always the ones who can execute on that. And Elizabeth Holmes is a good example in terms of charisma and ability to raise a large amount of finance, getting in for $1 billion. And also a great example of somebody who unfortunately couldn't execute on the plan.
Exactly. And Adam Newman, I'm reminded of as well.
Exactly.
We were, highly charismatic, could raise a lot of money, but as you say, couldn't execute. So, and I think that just sort of flipping it over, you've sort of referred to it, but from the investor, if there are people who are considering making some sort of early stage angel investments, what are the things that they're looking for? You're back to saying it's the individuals that you're investing in, but from when you analyze, and I know you've done a lot of analysis on your successes and your failures, and you begin to see some common traits emerge because you've got quite a number there. What are the things? What are the key issues other than the people? Then what are the other things which you have been in common throughout the majority of your successful investments?
No, if you take the journey is different from the failures.
Right.
If you take the failures, just come back to it. It's not reaching product market fit before investment dries up. And there's all kinds of reasons. It may be the tech didn't work quite. Maybe the cost of getting into the market's too high. It may be the competition. It may be a macroeconomic issue, like COVID got in the way. There's lots of reasons there. If you're taking the journey on the way there, then the ones that haven't succeeded, in principle, have made the wrong decisions at some point about something. You know. And obviously, there's all kinds of factors here. Timing is a really important factor.
Yes.
In fact, timing and luck are very similar in our sector. You know, having luck is because you got the timing right, and choosing that timing. I've got, for instance, a close friend who I'm seeing actually in the Rockies, and his close friend, his entrepreneur close friend, in a few weeks' time. They set up a clean tech business when it was called clean tech. And of course, capital dried up completely for that. Now, carbon reduction technologies, which is what clean tech's become, really easy to raise money. And so that one actually succeeded despite, and that's described in the book actually, despite it being insolvent for several months.
Wow.
They managed to get an exit out of it, which was a good return for the investors and very good return, compared with failure for the founders. So timing is really important.
But so timing and luck, as you say, hard to control luck as is, but the ability to whether it's raising money, whether it's exiting, recognize the environment that's around you, and I guess kind of trying to do your best to look over the horizon in terms of what's the future direction for this particular sector. Is it likely to be better or worse based on all the knowledge we know? And therefore, timing of an exit, we should just exit now because perhaps the future isn't looking so bright and in their opinion. So yes, I've heard a lot about that. Timing is really important throughout the whole thing. Now, just to sort of wrap all this up in terms of the whole kind of advice to entrepreneurs, and I know you mentioned it earlier on, and you've sort of written effectively a letter to young Peter, the young 20-something-year-old entrepreneur. Just summarize what that says, or what advice you would give to your young self or other young entrepreneurs.
Yeah, there are 9 or so points.
Right.
One is to do with people. So in order to scale a business, it's very unlikely to be able to scale a business, or it might be able to do with AI possibly in a few years' time, which will be a weird situation. But you've got to scale with people. Now, we don't invest in service business generally. The sort of investor I am, because that scales with the number of people we scale. We want business that will scale with technology, spinning up servers or producing larger volumes of hardware. But those still need people. So recruiting the best people, and then also, as we said earlier on, letting them go at the right time because they're just not growing with the company. Letting them go before they let themselves go, or they put in a position where you've got to let them go. So people. And I don't know whether you know, but it's said that the Google founders spent about half their time for the first 3 years just recruiting.
Wow.
They'd obviously had enough capital coming in, and they needed to recruit, and they spent huge amounts of time interviewing to get the right people. And I'm sure that made a massive difference. I've never seen an entrepreneur I backed spend that much time on it, but that's so the people. So this is people at all kinds of levels. This is also your board and your advisors. And then maybe even occasionally your co-founder, your co-founders, exiting co-founders, or being exited yourself by an investor or whatever. The most important ratio, which I got wrong occasionally, but not always, is customer acquisition cost lifetime value.
Yes, completely. And that's in your book as well. And I thought I took an extra note on that. I thought that's very interesting, to get that ratio.
It's called unit economics. So it's the cost of acquisition of customers, the fully loaded cost, including people and marketing and everything else, has got to be a multiple. It's got to the lifetime value has got to be a multiple of that, a minimum of 3 or 4, and hopefully 7, 8 or more. But do bear in mind the lifetime value is the gross margin, not the sales. It's the contribution to the business. So understanding that, and that's really difficult sometimes for early stage startups because they don't know, they haven't tried it yet, and they can't find enough data on other organizations. So they obviously put in the assumptions and the plan, and those assumptions could be wildly out. Follow macroeconomics, try and come back to what you just said a moment ago. I completely cocked up with Camdata in 1989. We hadn't got the internet. We had, media, of course, but we hadn't got the internet. And I hadn't noticed that the recession when the interest rates were 14, 15%, knock-on effects on huge mortgages, huge borrowing and everything. I hadn't noticed that the big companies were cutting back on capital equipment. So I carried on expanding on the rise of really great growth. And although there are no photographs in the new book, they will be on the website.
Yeah.
So there'll be a whole load of images. And one of those is the disastrous collapse in order intake from January 1990. So again, this is again to do with planning for the future. No business in principle should go bust insolvently because you should have foreseen enough to cope with that. Unfortunately, that one did, and I'm very anti. If you ever read the other book about the difference in solvent closure and insolvent closure.
Yeah, so therefore very important. And again, often entrepreneurs, they've just got their heads down. They're thinking about their business. They're thinking about, making profits, next quarter's returns. And you do have to lift your head up a little bit and look at, as you say, the macroeconomic environment. What's the direction of travel for interest rates? I mean, gosh, if you're thinking about opening a restaurant business at a particular time when interest rates are going up and it's discretionary expenditure and it's not quite so good times, but easy for people to cut costs. So just, that's, very solid advice there as well. Excellent. Thank you. Now, let's talk about the book. The book which came out yesterday, which, as I said earlier on, I've halfway through reading it. I've done a bit of research before as well. Such a profound book. The name of the book is Public Success, Private Grief. And obviously very self-explanatory in the title there. But let's sort of talk through. Thank you for holding it up. Anyone's watching this, you will be able to see it on video or indeed, online anywhere nowadays. So let me just start by asking you why you wrote the book.
So I wrote the book because I want to leave. I believe, and the people who've read it so far, a few people have read it so far before the launch, agree that there's inspirational impact in it. So I've done this. Because of the cancer I've got, the late stage cancer, I'm almost certainly, and again based on data from other people with the same cancer, and there are hundreds of thousands of us around the world, it's unlikely I'll last more than another year. So I wanted to create another legacy. I have a legacy in having a child, I have a legacy in other things and some buildings and things like that. But I just wanted to put down in writing things which I'd learned through life. So this is basically a memoir, and the public success is things we haven't talked about yet, but, Angel of the Year, and I was the president of the European Trade Body, and I was on the Global Business Angel Network, and I've got an honorary doctorate, and lots of successes in my field, not in the consumer field, but in my field. So I've had successes, but I've also had some pretty terrible tragedies.
Yeah.
We mentioned alcoholism. I'm 24 years sober, but the process, I don't know if you got to that point in the book, the process of the depths of alcoholism and the recovery and how I coped with that.
Yeah.
The death of my brother at 21, my sister of alcoholism at 53, the death of my ex-wife at 52. She was ex-wife, but she was the mother of my children. My cancer, which I've got a YouTube channel, and it's described in the book. You won't have got there yet, but in terms of how I've coped and how I've, come to terms with it.
Can I just sorry to interrupt, just because there's so much to say there, and it is all there, and I mean the book is searingly honest. That's why I know you're open about talking about this, and I obviously want to be respectful and discreet around these things, but it's there for the public to read if anyone's going to be inspired, as people will be. When I was reading it and you were talking through the process when you were feeling a bit off balance, go for a checkup, get referred by your GP, and you given the diagnosis, and that must have been, just a hugely big shock, a profound moment. It wasn't what you were expecting, to say the least. Just go back to those, and it wasn't even that long ago. It was just sort of a couple of years ago.
So what you're seeing now is a Peter Cowley that's in a very different state than was then. So I don't think I would have been able to do this interview with you in those days or weeks following the diagnosis, because when they found the cancer, so initially one of the secondaries, the metastases, was found in my brain, which meant I couldn't balance. I just run the Cambridge Half Marathon, and then 3 weeks later I couldn't cycle, and I would have to touch things as I walked around the room, and that was only the secondary. So when they found the primary, which is a never smoker lung cancer, and all over my body and bones, hip, adrenal glands, lymph systems, etc., ribs, then it was really tough. I thought at this point I probably haven't got stage 4B cancer, more than a month to live. And I was in a mess because I was on steroids. So I was not sleeping. I was, my mood was very different from it is now. I was putting on lots of weight again. I tried very hard to get rid of some. I had done successfully. So it was really tough. And then I have a cancer which is worth a lot of money to AstraZeneca. And they make $7 billion a year out of selling me and others a targeted therapy. This isn't a chemotherapy; it's something that targets very specifically, and it's working exceptionally well for me, as it turns out. I just take a tablet once a day. It's a very expensive tablet. It costs the NHS about $40,000 a year, and I hardly have any side effects. So, what happened in those first few weeks, which what you've read the beginning of the first chapter. If you really get to some later chapters, you'll understand more of how deeply, not depressed, but how down I was at that point, how I thought my life was going to be over. And then over time, over the 3 months when the therapy started working and the scans showed that, then things got better and better. And I've embraced life as, again, you probably know a little bit about me.
I do.
I mean, in the last 3 months, in the last year, I've been to all 7 continents. I slept on Antarctica in January. I've been skiing twice. I did 2 half marathons within 2 weeks of each other, and I've finished the book and everything with my wife. Of course, she's the co-author. So but it was. I mean, those first 3 months were very tough. I've got to terms with my the fact that I might not live that much longer, and I'm really embracing life to the full. I hope this is inspirational to others. I mean, obviously you need the time and the money to be able to do that, and the motivation and the risk appetite, because I'm doing things my oncologist just as you read in the book. When you get to that point, I said to him, whatever. I won't spoil that bit.
No, you are absolutely embracing life for sure, and through travel and just full engagement with life, it would seem. And it just makes me think, do you think that other people without the sort of diagnosis that you've got aren't doing that? Is there a sense, I think when I speak to a lot of people, there's a sense of I've got loads of time, I don't need to travel or do so much, so there's always time in the future. And people talk about this, when this happens, when that happens, when the kids grow up, when I retire, when I'll do and sometimes, well, as unfortunately as you're being very candid now, in your circumstances, as is currently diagnosed, you've got less time than you were anticipating, and therefore you're grabbing as much out of life as you can. I mean, obviously it has impacted your outlook on life.
No, it'd be unfair to expect others to do that. You can't live your life in the extremely rapid, sort of frighteningly chaotic at times, it seems, always all very well planned way. You've got to put stuff off. But I do hope that some people will take away that the thing that they were delaying doing, for whatever reason, speaking to an old friend, going to see their granny, little things like that, spending a bit more time with the parents or what are their children. That already started to come across that, the way that my ex-wife and I didn't bring up our children the way that we all would hope to do so. So no, the franticness of what I'm doing definitely shouldn't be adopted by anybody until they get close to, potentially the end of life and have the opportunity to do it, because I just happen to be, the therapy is very good. So people will be inspired in all kinds of different ways, and grasping life a bit more is a minor part compared with some of the other things people read, but it's still an important part.
Very, very much so. And I certainly have been inspired thus far. You mentioned it a couple of times earlier on, but sadly your life and those around you have been touched by addiction in particular, and alcoholism specifically. You describe in your book that you were an alcoholic. You refer to it as a high-functioning alcoholic for 20 years. So you were still in business. You were running your business. You were going about, but you were, I guess, you were drinking at an uncontrollable level. I mean, tell me more about that particular chapter of your life. It sounded pretty brutal for as you say, your children and those people around you.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. You said 20 years. It's probably 10 years, and the chapter's called "The Lost Decade."
Sorry.
Yeah. I was drinking too heavily, but not alcoholically,
right
for longer than those 10 years.
Right.
So yeah, the kids were what were they? 7, 5, and 3 when Camden went bust. My drinking went up. My marriage failed for reasons that you've read already in the book.
Yeah.
And the kids would see less of me. And eventually I got sober after 3 attempts at rehab by 2000. But yeah, I was a functioning drunk. I wasn't drinking solidly every single day. You couldn't do that. I couldn't have afforded it. B, my liver would have collapsed.
Yeah.
And C, I wouldn't be able to have any relationship with anything, never mind running a business. But there are many. One should never accuse anyone of being an alcoholic, but there are many people out there, and the listeners will recognize people in their, people they know that they think drink too much and still continue to function. Whether those are alcoholics or not, it's not up to us to say. AA has a very strict rule that says the only person that can call themselves can use the word alcoholic is on yourself, not to anybody else.
Yes.
But we still see alcohol or other drugs. It isn't necessarily alcohol affecting people's health and lives and relationships. And that was affecting me, but I was not in the gutter.
No.
I was running the company in such a way that I was earning enough money to A, fund my alcoholism, and B, have a life of some sort. Sure. But of course, my health, I mean, when I got stopped for drink driving, which I guess you've read about already, I was 3.5 times the drink driving limit. Now, so luckily, I didn't damage anybody. It was just, as it says there, it was a fair cop. I finally got stopped, and it was a huge relief to get stopped and be banned. I don't know whether you can understand that.
No,
but
completely. You just literally you can't drive anymore, and obviously, driving is an important part of your business life, so it's restricted you. So it was.
But it also meant that I knew at that point, despite my alcoholism, I wouldn't go and kill somebody with the car, either myself or a child or something else.
Yeah.
So that was a relief. I didn't stop drinking completely for 6 months, but it still was a huge relief to have been banned.
Exactly. Now, reflecting on your business journey and experience, do you think, or have you observed that entrepreneurs and founders are more prone to addictive behavior or drinking too much or anything else? Has that been something you've seen more common or?
No. I've never seen and I've been back to 150 odd entrepreneurs, and I don't know them all that well, but I know all of them. I've met them at some point when I invested. I've never seen a obvious addiction in any of them.
Right. Okay.
In terms of a chemical substance, but I have seen obsessiveness in terms, particularly of learning.
Right.
So, which is any obsession can have its downsides because it's soaking up time that you could be using for something else, like relationships or building a business. But learning, and hopefully then, if they're good listeners, they're learning, listening, and adapting. So I certainly, and people are so passionate about their own businesses, they do soak up a lot of time, which is why, as we know, there is a level of one of the reasons why there's a level of mental health issues in founders, because they are so focused and they're not absorbing. Maybe it's exercise they're missing, maybe it's diet, maybe it's relationships. They're so focused on building the business. That doesn't apply to all, and that actually wears off to some extent as they become more committed with their own relationship and possibly children, etc. But even so no, I've never seen an addiction. There must happen. There must be people out there.
But no more so than general society. Right?
Exactly.
Okay.
I've never seen that. Yeah.
I mean, I've observed that a lot of entrepreneurs have got a low boredom threshold. They get bored very quickly. They've got enough to do. So, I mean, often if it's a form of workaholism, then all right, as you say, no addiction is good, but it's probably less bad than some of the other things you can do, throwing yourself into work or learning or other things. But I think it's quite hard often for business owners, a lot of business owners, to relax, actually, just to sort of give themselves some, the weekend off, to sort of put down the laptop and relax. So it's a sort of constant looking for the next thing. I've seen that happen, but okay, interesting, good feedback there in terms of.
Yeah. So can I just add to that? Because there's no doubt my alcoholism, which was an obsession, addiction is an obsession, converted, and this is described in the book, into a level of busyness.
Yes.
So busyness with a Y. So this is where I was just what you were saying. I was involved in lots of things, not to the detriment, I don't think, of the people around me, but I gave so much back. I spent, although we haven't mentioned yet, I was on the board of 7 charities and chair of several of them. So, over a period of 20 years, I've mentored hundreds, possibly over 1,000 entrepreneurs, which is why I wrote the first 2 books, so I could scale myself. And although we haven't got to it, I'm going to mention it now. Part of my coping mechanisms for the death of my middle son in 2009 and the death of my younger son, who was in business with me in 2022, was being busy, just contributing. I've got heavily involved in suicide prevention charities, and some money from the book. Each book sale goes to Papyrus, which is the largest in the UK suicide prevention charity for the under 35s, for young people, because it's for males at least, it's the most common cause of death under that age in the UK, and that's true of other countries as well. So those, just to expand slightly on that, I've written the book. I sort of had the book in me, and then Alan died in 22, and that's what tipped me over the edge to realize that actually, if people can learn how to cope, this is one of the other inspirational takeaways from the loss of a child, tragically the loss of 2 children in my case, then it will all be worth it. I mean, people crassly say if one person changes something because of what they've read and what I've done, that works. But I believe there's enough in here to affect a lot of people. And that's why I'm pushing hard for the book to be read. It's nothing to do with brand or making money, and I'm going to make any money out of this. It's all to do with people reading it.
Absolutely. I've got to say to you, I'm the father of children, including a teenage boy right now. And I had to put the book down for a little bit and just take a breath. I knew some of your background story before I started reading the book. And of course, you go into detail about what happened in your family. And I think it'd be fair to say anyone who's a parent, there is nothing worse that could happen than the loss of a child. And deeply sadly, you've lost 2 of your children, and to suicide as well, which is absolutely tragic. And my thoughts on that were, I don't know how you got up every day and just went about your business. Looking back in it, I mean, reflecting back now with a bit of distance between these tragic events, I mean, how do you think you did? How did you get out of bed each day?
Well, I've obviously spent a lot of time working on that in the last, particularly since writing the book. I didn't think it was very cathartic, but I'm sure it was, because I thought more carefully about my background and how I've coped. And I've come across a term called post-traumatic growth. And I think that's what I've achieved. So the opposite is post-traumatic depreciation. You can imagine what that is. Somehow, for whatever reason, either some internal strength, something that was genetically in here, my upbringing. I've had a lot of therapy for various reasons, but not specifically about this. Somehow I've used this. They say whatever knocks you makes you, you survive makes you stronger. And this has happened. Somehow I've become not just stronger in myself, but also focusing on helping others. And and you're right. I mean, I've spoken to so many people who've said exactly that. Some of which had lost a child, and many that haven't. And they think, how the hell can you get out of bed? Somebody asked me. I gave a presentation to 60-odd people last week. And they said, how have you survived? Why haven't you given up? I misinterpreted him. I thought suicide, taking my own life.
Right.
No, I explained that by saying I'm happily married, third time, but only got a son, still got 1 child left. There's no way I could let those people down. What he actually meant was, why haven't you disappeared into a ball of depression?
Sure,
and there have been times, obviously clearly not on this podcast, where things have been terribly tough. But I've got through it. I've got, and it's not because I'm I don't think it's because I'm a cold, with a strong shell around me. I think it's because I've processed it enough.
Well, it is an absolute inspiration. And the words that you share, the words that you're sharing with us today and in the book, so powerful. It really are, regardless of whether someone's gone through something similar or they haven't, equally powerful. But I think, sadly, one way or another, us human beings, we get touched by a tragedy either immediately or somewhere, reasonably close to us. So the ability to, as you say, to impact positively and help somebody else get through that is just so powerful and so valid.
Thank you.
And I'm just kind of just thinking again, a bit more about, this is obviously, it was two of your boys, and it is, this is, it's not dedicated to, males or females, but there's a higher preponderance of this with young men. And I think, and obviously you know a lot more than I do, men are, and I, as a male myself, we don't talk that much to our mates, our pals, our family. We keep a lot bottled up. And I'm just going to relating this as well to business owners and entrepreneurs. I mean, I'm a founder, CEO myself, and it's quite a lonely business, actually. And what are your thoughts?
It's not if you have a co-founder, though.
Yeah, well, I don't, and it's less bad, but yeah, nevertheless, if you've got someone to bounce it off, for sure. But presumably that would be your advice. I mean, what is your advice to anyone going through a tough time, business owner or not, who are really struggling? What are the sort of things they should think about, or what should they do?
So first of all, just to elaborate on that, it's very rare that the sophisticated investor will invest in a single founder.
Interesting.
They want to be a minimum of two, possibly three. Four's too many.
Right.
And this isn't necessarily for the reasons that we're just going to discuss about mental health and stress. It's because the combination of two people with not necessarily similar, but strong trust, but not necessarily similar skill sets, is much greater than the sum of the two parts. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, 1 + 1 = 3. Yeah, I get it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In business terms, it just means these problems are not just shared, but they're probably solved in a way that you can't necessarily do yourself. In your case, you'd have to rely on maybe your spouse, I don't know, or whatever, or friends, or non-exec board members. But if it's got worse than that, and it's a situation which is actually causing mental health, which is people are becoming much more open about, thank goodness. I mean, we're not like the Americans. We don't all have therapy from the age of 3, of course.
No.
But there are resources. I mean, not necessarily through the NHS or through your GP, where coaching and counselling. I mean, they're on a spectrum, aren't they?
Yeah.
Coaching and counselling are both improving and helping an individual with things that they're worried about and want to improve about themselves. So I would strongly suggest that somebody, if they can justify the time, which I certainly hope they can, and the money, then they should have a level of counselling, not necessarily therapy. Therapy is very long-term. If it's a long-term problem, that would be the case, but a number of sessions with a counsellor in that situation, if it's a mental health issue, or beginning to be a mental health issue, then it's well and truly worth it, because the knock-on effects in terms of relationships, the business efficiency, everything else is and if it got worse, it could become tragic.
Are there obvious telltale signs if someone around you think they're just a bit off right now? They're keeping it to themselves and not talking. A lot of this is about communication, isn't it? And just trying to allow it
to communicate. Yeah, it comes back to listening and being honest with yourself. I mean, it's sort of, although that wasn't meant in a personal way, it was meant in terms of their business.
Sure.
But those also apply to how emotionally aware, or even the level of emotional quotient that the founders have, and recognizing it. I mean, I don't think it's in the book, I better not say it, but there was a founder that I had to spend a lot of time with because they become disillusioned with the business.
Right.
And that was very painful for the business. It's painful for the other founder. It's painful for me. We got through it, but it was, as you just said, with communication, it's the person who's having the problem, and males are, as we know, much worse than females, have got to be able to communicate.
Yeah, so it's a reminder to all of us just to to be alert and be aware if there are people around us that we can see are struggling. Then be there, listen, be a resource. I think there's not much more we can do. Thank you so much for sharing that. Few more questions for you, but this has been such a powerful conversation. I've got a lot out of it myself, and I know others will. Is this book? Is it your legacy? What would you like your legacy to be, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, obviously thought a lot about that. The traditional legacy is things like we talk about having children,
Yeah.
which is if you haven't got children. I mean, I was talking to somebody recently who won't be listening to this, but so I can say it. I won't mention their name, but they don't have children, and they're writing a book at the moment which they're regarding as their legacy.
Right.
That there's something there that will be passed down. In my case, I haven't built any businesses that will survive for very long. I've got a couple of property projects which you'll see in the book there, which I feel very proud of. I've written. I've obviously got memories and friends that people, people will remember that for a while, certainly for a few years, I hope. And I've written 3 books, one of which probably won't be classed as a legacy. The Investor, 4,500 copies read. Should be, but this very specifically is the one that I hope will be the legacy. And unfortunately, it's likely that it will sell and be read more once I die than before. But that doesn't matter. The important thing is that on the basis, it's just bring my wife into this. So Lise we've only married a year, known each other for 3 years. She's a professional translator, an author, a wordsmith, a proper wordsmith. She's Dutch, did a PhD in medieval English, and she's the one that's taken my story and told it. So she's the storyteller. And as you've read, it's sort of drawn you through the book, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
This is what everybody's saying. It's sort of, it's not page turner quite, but it's almost a page turner. It's almost the point where you really want to know what's happening next to Peter and how he's coped and what tragedies about to befall him, etc.
Well, that's the thing. It is an incredible story, and it's well written. And yes, we can't get around it. It is full of tragedies. It's full of triumphs as well. There are other, there's the huge, successes. You've had successes, in business and financially, and as you've mentioned earlier on, awards you've been given, recognition you've been given throughout your life for your professional services. And there's almost there's some humor in there as well. There's some absolutely positive things. So it is a great book to read, and for me to be reading it and thinking, this is a true story of the human being who I'm speaking to right now. It is just, to me, it's just so impactful. And there is no doubt a lot of people will buy it. A lot of people will recommend it to their friends. Because it's one of these rare books that is both, very relevant and interesting from a business viewpoint, but equally, probably more importantly, from a personal viewpoint. And again, I just come back to whether you're a business owner, whatever the hell you are, you're a human being, and people can relate to other people's stories. That's what it's all about. So it is a very, very compelling story. I hope you are around for a very long time, as long as you possibly can be, to share the message. The book has just come out, and anyone listening to this, strongly encourage you to go as quickly as you can and buy the book. And as you say as well, apart from the impact and the sort of learnings that anyone who reads the book will get, is also money is going to a particular charity, suicide prevention charity, which is, we're doing positive things there as well. A couple of last questions, if I may, Peter. We've talked a lot about the book, and strong recommendation to buy. Are there any other resources over the years, kind of maybe thinking back probably to your business life, but it could be more broad, more broad? Any other resources, books, podcasts, anything that you found useful in the past in through your life that others might recognize or pick up or read?
Yeah, and that's an interesting one, because when I started out in business, which was in the 80s, there's no internet. So there obviously were business books, but I read a few, but I relied more on mentors for helping me. So, and the list is a short list at the beginning of the book, as you probably saw, the people who I had more mentors than they were listed there, but they're the people who recognized I was better than I thought I was at that point. They believed in me more than I did myself. So mentors, non-exec directors of CamData, they've been a really important part of, not all mentioned on there. So absorbing information from people I found more easy than from books at that point. Now, bringing the internet, which, really was early 90s as far as I was concerned, probably mid 90s. I first had my first website in '93, 30 years ago.
You were way ahead of the rest of us then.
Well, I was, because I'm techie.
1993.
You can't see, but I've got 2 wearables on.
You're definitely techie, that's for sure.
Techie. Yeah. So that started to realize there wasn't much data on the internet. That started to be something I'd pull the information from. Move forward to when I became an angel investor. That was very different, because angel investing is about investing in people. How do you work out how good a person is as a newbie angel investor, early stage investor? That's really difficult. And the way to do that is to join others in learning through angel groups, or I even recommend, although I no faith in the long-term future of it, crowd equity funding, because you can go in there, you can put 20 quid in or 100 quid in, and you learn from the forum and the questions and answers what other people are interested in asking. So you learn a lot from that. If you came from investment business, different matter, you'd probably know that anyway.
Yeah.
So I I learned most of it from other angels, and then it got to the point where generally happened that I could then put more back into them, and hence the books and the 80-odd podcasts I did, or the Investor with my son Alan.
Yeah.
So there are a huge number of resources, but the best resource, so it's not necessarily the most efficient way of delivering, is to spend time with somebody else. I'm sure you must have mentored people over the years, and you've had mentors, and those interactions, although it's dialogue for a start rather than monologue, because any consuming content on the internet or by books or podcasts is always a one way direction.
Sure.
It's a dialogue, and you can learn from that. So there are, I can't name any specifically, but there are huge amounts of stuff on the internet and books, but nothing, in my view, and maybe this is showing my grey hair, beats an hour with a human being who's been through it before.
Really interesting, that is. Yeah, the power and impact of mentoring. And it works for the mentor as well, doesn't it? As well as the mentee.
God, what I've got out of that, the amount I'm 69.
Right.
Am I 69? No, I'm 68 at the moment. 69 in September. I'm 70 next year. And it's really kept me young, spending time with people generally, it used to be a generation younger than me. Now it's a generation and a half younger than me.
Younger, energetic people with good ideas.
Exactly. Keeps you young.
I've enjoyed that myself. And it just reflecting on that almost brings it full circle back to your early days in Australia with Dick Smith. And he was, I was thinking that when you were saying that, the power of having, obviously he was much older than you in those days, and he was a mentor and someone who you looked up to and was inspired by.
Exactly.
So your ability now to do the same to others was wonderful. It's wonderful, and it really works. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I agree with you as well. And going back to your point a moment or two ago about, a form of addiction and people who want to just continually learn. I've known plenty of people who just never stop reading books, but don't execute on anything. They're the world's best learners, but they don't actually do anything. So yeah, spending quality time with, good people who have, got your best interests at heart and can inspire you and mentor you. I think that's very worthwhile. And just any thoughts on how somebody listening to this how do you find a mentor? I know there are sort of formal mentoring groups, but is it more just word of mouth and looking around at people that know?
If you've got an early stage company that wants to raise capital, then there are a number of accelerators that are available. Yeah. Getting on some of them, like Entrepreneur First, is really difficult. And that's actually a talent-led rather than a team-led. The difference being talent-led is people who want to be entrepreneurs join, and teams are formed during the process. Right. And then team-led is where you've got a team already and you join with the team and the idea. So those are the ones that will give you easiest access to mentors, because that's how their model works. They have a group of anything between 10 and maybe even 100 mentors, which you can be over-mentored by sometimes. But anyway, because you end up with so many different opposing ideas floating around. So that's the easiest route. Or academic institutions. So if it's an early stage, if you're somehow connected somehow with an academic institution, and it's got a business courses of some form. Or there are coaching programs. And here we're talking about companies that don't necessarily need or have had external equity investment, because if you take the number, there are about 5 million companies in the UK, and there's probably only 100,000 companies that raised, if you include the stock market, perhaps 1,500 companies well, certainly, let's say it's less than 5,000. So it's less than 1% of all companies have raised external investment. Lots of them are just one-person companies, of course, so they don't take equity. They're just service businesses generally. So there are programs for doing that, coaching programs that are funded either by yourself or by sometimes by government or local authorities. And of course, it's networking. I mean, in the end, it depends where you live in the country. Some places are very much better than other places. But just spending time in business club environments or whatever, talking to people. Most of the people in most parts of the country will want some money for that transaction. They'll help you. They'll probably be coaching you rather than mentoring you. Cambridge is particularly different because there's a huge number of free mentors. The community supports itself better than anywhere else I've seen in Europe.
Fascinating. Yeah. And it is interesting, this mentoring and I was thinking a few years ago, as we were all locked down in our houses and everyone kind of magically overnight became sort of digital and video based, but there's no doubt about it, in real life, in person, over a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or something, and just meeting other people in person is so valuable. And yeah, I agree with you. You just got to get out and do it. Find the group that you connect with and just, be there, be around them, have good quality conversations.
Exactly.
Great advice. Thank you. Peter, the last question I'm going to ask you is something that I ask everyone who comes on this podcast, and the range of answers are, as you would expect, very, very wide. I think based on your own life experiences, you are better qualified than almost anyone else to answer this question. And the question is around the definition of wealth. And when I say wealth, I mean true wealth. Peter, what's your definition of true wealth?
It certainly isn't monetary. No. Money helps. It gives you freedom, it gives you choice, it gives you comfort. But at no point in my whole life, I mentioned earlier, 40 years old, financial independence. That matters, obviously, having financial independence. And I've reached that now, but it took me a lot longer than 40 years old. And I did it out of angel investing, not out of being an entrepreneur.
Right.
I've been a mediocre entrepreneur, but as it turns out, a successful angel investor. It's not that. It's to do with purpose and experiences and helping others and health and, it's almost too complicated. There's probably some spirituality in there. You saw that I believe it. I'm not at all religious, but I do believe there's a higher power. I do believe there's something that's beyond what we can, comprehend. It's about happiness. It's about, if you've got kids, it's about their happiness and their healthiness, etc. So wealth is probably a state of mind, really. Not something you're living with, but it's how you feel internally. And come back to some of the things I've talked to you about. I seem remarkably positive, considering I've only got 10 months to go. I've lost 2 children. How am I doing that? It's probably because I am, in your definition, or my version of your definition, I'm actually wealthy. I have this true wealth. I have this spiritual comfort or something. I don't really know what words one could use here. But
it's not money, or it's certainly not limited to money and nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. It's not limited to no. I've had this conversation with many people, many entrepreneurs. How much money do you want to make out of this journey? And generally in the UK, it's not very much. In the States, it's far too much. But it certainly helps having enough that you don't have to worry about it.
Absolutely. No, that's a beautiful description and a beautiful definition. And you're right. That's the sort of resounding, other than this sort of really helpful information you've shared, the conversation we're having right now. You are positive and you're upbeat, and you're an absolute inspiration to thousands or perhaps millions as a book goes out in future times. You have got a website which we'll post a link to in the show notes. We will post a link to the book as well if people want to buy it directly or through other places. If people want to get in touch with you, should they do so via the website? Should they communicate?
So you probably haven't got to one of my one of my life's changes, which is I have a bucket list and I have a fuck it list.
Right, I like it.
And the bucket list, it's not something I made up. It came from a friend who I was at university with, who tragically died of cancer a couple of years ago, but he was talking about his bucket list. So he's obviously got it from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, helping entrepreneurs is now part of the bucket list.
Right.
I'm prioritizing my life.
Yeah.
If somebody has a particular thing that they feel I can help with, which would probably to do with suicide, so I'm putting more effort into helping people in that process, not just money but time, etc. Maybe cancer, but I've got my Project Cancer YouTube, which has a lot of information on it. There's some of that information in the book. So reaching out to me, go ahead. My email address is on my website, but I'm going to be choosy about who I respond to.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense to me. And frankly, there's enough information that you've made publicly available for anyone to, whatever it is, whether it's cancer, whether it's suicide, whether it's business. There's a lot out there for people to consume and learn a bit more about. And as I say, we'll post links to make it easy, people just to sort of click on and find more about your story. But a great place to start, I know you do have other books, more business focused, but a great place to start would be with the brand new book, which has just come out. Peter Cowley, thank you so much for your time today. On behalf of all business owners and entrepreneurs in the UK, Europe, around the world, I want to say personally thank you for what you've done historically in the past, what you continue to do, what you'll continue to do in the future, and as I say, as long as is possible into the future. But for now, Peter, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. Thank you.